My sister drained my entire $100,000 wedding fund to buy a custom, diamond-encrusted designer gown for her own big day. My parents actually told me to get over it, so I didn't just get mad, I got even. I bought the very venue she was supposed to get married in, and I canceled her wedding. If you have a sibling who is the undeniable golden child of the family, you already know the distinct flavor of marginalization I grew up tasting. My older sister, Frankie, wasn't just the favorite. She was a religion my parents, Susan and Robert, devoutly practiced. If I won a regional debate championship, my parents would take us out to dinner to celebrate Frankie passing her driver's test on the fourth try. I learned early on to make myself small, to build my own life quietly, and to expect absolutely nothing from the people who were supposed to have my back. But I didn't let that stop me. I moved out at 18, put myself through college, working night shifts at a grim diner, and eventually landed a fantastic career as a financial analyst. Along the way, I met Liam. Liam was everything my family wasn't: grounded, fiercely loyal, and deeply empathetic. When he proposed to me on a rainy Tuesday in our tiny kitchen, holding a modest but beautiful sapphire ring, I didn't need a grand audience. I just needed him. We were ecstatic. We had big dreams for our wedding. We didn't want something pompous, but we wanted something magical. A massive greenhouse botanical garden, incredible food, and a live band to dance the night away with our chosen family. Weddings like that aren't cheap, especially in the city, but we were prepared. Over 5 years, Liam and I had meticulously saved $30,000. Then came the miracle. My great-aunt Clara passed away. Clara was a fierce, independent woman who had always seen right through my parents' blatant favoritism. I was the only one who visited her in her final years, driving 3 hours every other weekend to bring her groceries and play gin rummy. In her will, she left a specific trust entirely to me, $70,000, explicitly earmarked in a letter for the beautiful wedding Chloe deserves, away from the shadows. Between our savings and Clara's gift, we had exactly $100,000. It was a staggering amount of money, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly secure. I felt celebrated. I moved the funds into a high-yield savings account. Here is where I made the single biggest mistake of my entire life, a mistake born out of a lingering, desperate wish to trust my mother. Years ago, when I was a teenager, my mom and I had a joint bank account. When the inheritance cleared, the bank required me to physically visit a branch to open a new solitary account for the massive deposit. Because I was traveling for work, my mother, who was helping me organize some vendor lists, suggested I temporarily park the funds in our old, dormant joint account so we could immediately start writing checks for deposits. "I'll handle the florist and the caterer while you're in Chicago," she had said, sounding so uncharacteristically helpful. I agreed. Meanwhile, Frankie was engaged to Bradley Harper. Bradley was the heir to a mid-sized, highly lucrative regional real estate empire. The Harpers were old money snobs who looked down their noses at everyone, especially my family. Bradley's mother, Victoria Harper, was a terrifying woman who treated Frankie like a peasant who had somehow conned her precious son. Despite the Harper family wealth, Bradley was notoriously stingy. He refused to pay for a lavish wedding, insisting his parents would handle the catering, but Frankie was strictly on her own for her dress, her bridesmaids, and her personal styling. Frankie was crumbling under the pressure of trying to impress Victoria. She became a monster, obsessing over every microscopic detail of her upcoming nuptials at the Harrington Conservatory, the most elite venue in the state. Frankie's wedding was set for October. Mine was planned for the following May. For weeks, Frankie was miserable. She complained incessantly in our family group chats that Bradley's mother called her chosen wedding dress quaint and pedestrian. Then, suddenly, her mood shifted entirely. She was suddenly flying to Paris with her 3 bridesmaids for a fitting. She was posting Instagram stories, sipping champagne in first-class lounges, tagging elite haute couture designers. My parents cooed over the photos, bragging to their friends about their daughter's high society life. I didn't think much of it. I assumed Bradley had finally caved, or the Harpers had opened their checkbooks. I was just happy she was off my back, so I could finally focus on booking my own dream venue, the glass house at the Botanical Gardens. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when Liam and I sat in the plush office of the Botanical Gardens event coordinator. We had just finalized the catering menu, selected the floral arrangements, and picked our date, The coordinator smiled warmly, sliding a contract across the mahogany desk. Everything looks perfect, Chloe. To secure the date, we just need the 20% deposit today. That will be $15,000, she said. Absolutely, I beamed, pulling out my phone to initiate the wire transfer from the joint account. Liam squeezed my knee, his eyes shining with excitement. I logged into my banking app. I navigated to the account. I stared at the screen. I blinked, convinced the app hadn't refreshed properly. I pulled the screen down to refresh it again. Available balance, $43.12. The breath left my lungs in a violent rush. My vision tunneled. Chloe? Liam asked, sensing the immediate shift in my posture. Is everything okay? Is the app down? I need to make a call, I stammered, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I excused myself, rushing out into the hallway, leaving a confused Liam and coordinator behind. I dialed the bank's fraud department, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. After what felt like an eternity of agonizing hold music, a representative named Sarah came on the line. Sarah, my account has been drained. There was $100,000 in there, and now it's gone. I need you to freeze everything and reverse the charges, I gasped, pacing the carpeted hallway. Let me look into this for you, Miss Evans, she said calmly. A minute passed. The silence was deafening. Okay, I see the transactions. However, these were not unauthorized. The funds were dispersed via several large wire transfers initiated by the secondary account holder. Secondary account holder? My blood ran cold. My mother? Susan Evans? Yes, ma'am. There are 3 international wires to a business named Atelier de Rêve, Haute Couture in Paris, totaling $75,000. There are also several charges for Air France first-class tickets, and a $12,000 charge to a boutique hotel in the 8th arrondissement. Because Susan Evans is an authorized signer on this account, these are considered valid transactions. You will need to take this up with her directly. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a dull thud. Frankie's trip, the sudden shift in her mood, the first-class flights, the fitting. My sister hadn't finally gotten Bradley to pay for her lavish wedding. She had stolen my wedding fund. She had taken Aunt Clara's gift, the only thing I had ever truly been given, and Liam's hard-earned savings, and she blew it on a dress to impress her nightmare mother-in-law. Liam came out into the hall and found me hyperventilating against the wall. When I choked out the words, his usually calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying fury. We didn't even go back into the office. We drove straight to my parents' house in absolute silence. When I kicked the front door open, the scene inside was practically domestic bliss. My mother was arranging hydrangeas in the kitchen, and Frankie was sitting at the island, looking at fabric swatches, a smug, relaxed smile on her face. "Where is it?" I screamed, the raw volume of my voice startling them both. "Where is my money, Frankie?" Frankie had the audacity to sigh and roll her eyes, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a stolen toy. "Chloe, please stop yelling. You're giving me a migraine. You stole $100,000 from me." I lunged forward, but Liam caught my waist, pulling me back to keep me from physically attacking her. My mother rushed over, holding her hands up like a referee. "Now, Chloe, let's all calm down. Nobody stole anything. The account was in my name, too." "You gave her my money?" I looked at my mother, the betrayal carving a hollow cavity in my chest. "Frankie was in a crisis. Chloe," my mother pleaded, her voice taking on that familiar, whining tone she always used to defend my sister. Victoria Harper cornered Frankie at the country club. She told her she looked like trailer trash in her original dress. Frankie's entire future with Bradley was on the line. You know how important this family's image is. She needed a custom gown to secure her place in that family. "And so you bought a $75,000 dress with my money?" I screamed at Frankie. "It wasn't just the dress, Chloe. God, be realistic," Frankie scoffed, examining her manicured nails. "It was the flights, the hotel for the fittings, the matching bespoke shoes. Honestly, Aunt Clara was just being spiteful, leaving it all to you anyway. We're sisters. We share. Plus, you and Liam are so simple. You don't need a lavish wedding. You guys could just get married in a nice public park or something. It fits your vibe way better." I stood there, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their delusion. I looked at my father, who had wandered into the kitchen holding a newspaper. He looked at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with me. "Your mother thought it was best, Chloe," he mumbled. "We'll pay you back. 10% a year, we promise. 10% a year. It would take them a decade to repay me, and that was assuming they ever actually paid a dime. They had completely bankrupted my future to buy a literal piece of clothing. "You're dead to me," I whispered, the rage suddenly turning into a cold, hardened block of ice in my stomach. "All of you." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," Frankie called out, as Liam guided me out the door. "You'll be over it by October. You're still a bridesmaid. Don't forget." We got into Liam's car. I didn't cry. The time for crying was over. I sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead at the asphalt, my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. They thought they had won. They thought I would just tuck my tail between my legs, accept my lot in life as the disposable sister, and let Frankie have her fairy tale. But Frankie had a fatal flaw. She was so obsessed with the aesthetics of her wedding, so consumed with the dress and the Parisian trips, that she had delegated the less glamorous financial logistics to Bradley. And Bradley, as I knew very well from his drunken complaints at a recent family barbecue, was a notorious procrastinator who hated parting with his money before he absolutely had to. I pulled out my phone and looked up the Harrington Conservatory. A dangerous, brilliant idea began to form in my mind. If I couldn't have my wedding, neither would she. I did not sleep that night. While Liam softly snored beside me in our cramped apartment, I sat at our kitchen table, bathed in the blue light of my laptop screen, drinking endless cups of black coffee. I am a financial analyst. My entire career is built on finding discrepancies, navigating corporate loopholes, and understanding the intricate flow of money. If Frankie and my parents thought I was just going to cry into a pillow and accept that my future was collateral damage for her vanity, they profoundly underestimated my capacity for vengeance. I started digging into the Harrington Conservatory. It was the most sought-after venue in the tri-state area, a sprawling, Victorian-style glass greenhouse surrounded by acres of manicured botanical gardens. It was exclusive, pretentious, and fiercely expensive. But as I pulled public records, tax documents, and municipal filings, a very different picture began to emerge. The venue was owned by a man named Richard Belmont, an aging socialite who had inherited the property but possessed absolutely zero business acumen. According to the county clerk's database, the Harrington Conservatory was drowning in massive tax liens. Belmont had taken out predatory loans to keep the doors open after the pandemic, and he was currently on the absolute brink of foreclosure. The property was secretly bleeding cash. I had the leverage, but I didn't have the capital. My bank account currently sat at a pathetic $43.12. The next morning, I laid out my findings on the kitchen table for Liam. I explained the tax liens, the impending foreclosure, and the fact that Richard Belmont was likely desperate for a quiet buyout to avoid public bankruptcy. Liam listened intently, his jaw tight. When I finished, he stared at the paperwork for a long time. Then, he let out a long, heavy sigh and rubbed his temples. "Chloe," he said softly, "there is something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago, but I wanted us to build our life on our own terms, without my family's shadow hanging over us." I frowned, confused. "Liam, what are you talking about?" "My full name is Liam Kensington," he said, looking me dead in the eye. "My grandfather is Arthur Kensington." I stopped breathing. Arthur Kensington was a legendary real estate tycoon. The Kensington Group owned half the commercial skyscrapers in the downtown district. They were billionaires. They were also the sworn, bitter business rivals of the Harper family, Bradley's family. The Kensingtons and the Harpers had been locked in a vicious, decades-long feud over zoning rights and city contracts. You're a Kensington?" I whispered, my mind struggling to process the information. The man who clipped coupons with me and drove a 10-year-old Honda was an heir to a real estate empire. "I walked away from the family business because I hated the toxicity," Liam explained, taking my hands in his. "But my grandfather and I are still close. And if there is one thing Arthur Kensington loves more than a lucrative real estate acquisition, it is publicly humiliating Victoria Harper and her pompous son." Within 24 hours, Liam and I were sitting in the penthouse boardroom of the Kensington Group, overlooking the city skyline. Arthur Kensington was a formidable, terrifying man in his late 70s, with sharp blue eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, listening in silence as I pitched the acquisition of the Harrington Conservatory. I didn't frame it as petty revenge, I framed it as a prime business opportunity. I showed him the venue's financials, the tax liens, and the potential for a massive return on investment if the management was restructured. It's a gold mine being run by an idiot, I concluded, sliding the dossier across the table. Belmont will sell for pennies on the dollar to avoid bankruptcy. You can acquire the flagship venue of the city's elite. Arthur flipped through the pages, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his weathered face. And I assume, my dear, that Bradley Harper's upcoming nuptials are currently booked at this very establishment? They are, I replied, meeting his gaze evenly. And if you buy the property and place it under a new holding company, the new ownership has the legal right to review, renegotiate, or terminate any pending event contracts that do not meet compliance. Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He looked at Liam, then back at me. He burst into a booming, terrifying laugh. Liam, my boy, you have found yourself a brilliant, ruthless woman. I love her. Arthur slammed his hand on the desk. I will buy the conservatory, but I'm not running it. I'm putting the LLC in your name, Chloe. Consider it an early wedding gift. You are the new owner. Do with the Harper contract exactly as you see fit. The buyout was executed with ruthless efficiency. Within 3 weeks, Richard Belmont quietly signed over the deed to avoid financial ruin, and Glasshouse Holdings LLC, with me listed as the sole director, became the legal owner of the Harrington Conservatory. The first thing I did was demand the master event ledger from the venue's panicked general manager. I locked myself in the manager's office and pulled the file for Frankie and Bradley's wedding. As I read through Bradley's contract, I actually laughed out loud. Bradley Harper was notoriously cheap, a trait he disguised as being frugal. Because he believed the Harper family name made him untouchable, he had bullied Belmont into accepting a mere $2,000 good faith hold on the date, rather than the industry-standard 50% non-refundable deposit. The contract clearly stipulated that the remaining balance of $45,000 was due in full exactly 90 days before the event. If the balance was not paid, the venue reserved the right to terminate the contract and release the date without notice. I checked the calendar. We were exactly 82 days away from Frankie's wedding. Bradley, in his arrogant negligence, had completely blown past the payment deadline. He hadn't paid a dime beyond the initial hold. According to the ironclad legal terms of the contract he himself had signed, their booking was null and void. I didn't call them. I didn't send an email. I simply went into the system, highlighted the reservation for Frankie Evans and Bradley Harper, and hit cancel. Then, I booked the date for myself. The weeks leading up to October were a masterclass in psychological torture. I remained completely silent, playing the part of the broken, defeated sister. My mother constantly texted me pictures of Frankie's wedding preparations, oblivious to my silence. Frankie's Instagram was a relentless feed of her posing in Paris, bragging about her custom, diamond-encrusted $75,000 gown, and boasting about her royal wedding at the Harrington Conservatory. They had absolutely no idea that a ticking time bomb was sitting directly beneath their perfectly curated facade. The explosion finally happened on a brisk Thursday evening, exactly 2 days before the scheduled wedding. It was the night of the wedding rehearsal. Liam and I arrived at the Harrington Conservatory 2 hours early. I unlocked the heavy wrought iron doors with my own set of master keys. The venue was breathtaking vaulted glass ceilings, thousands of blooming exotic orchids, and massive crystal chandeliers. It was the perfect place for a wedding. My wedding. I sat at a small wrought iron table in the center of the grand foyer, sipping a sparkling water, waiting. Liam stood beside me, looking incredibly handsome in a tailored dark suit, his hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. At exactly 6 p.m., the heavy double doors swung open. In walked the entire circus. Frankie was front and center, wearing a white silk jumpsuit, holding a clipboard and barking orders at her terrified bridesmaids. Behind her trailed my parents, looking incredibly smug. And bringing up the rear were Bradley and the terrifying Victoria Harper, draped in expensive furs and glaring at the floral arrangements as if they personally offended her. Frankie stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me sitting in the center of the room. Her annoyance was immediate and palpable. "Chloe? What on earth are you doing here?" Frankie snapped, marching toward me, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. "The rehearsal is for the bridal party only. You're not even in the wedding anymore, remember? You're ruining the aesthetic. Leave." My mother rushed forward, looking nervous. "Chloe, honey, please don't cause a scene. We told you we'd pay you back eventually. This is your sister's special week." I took a slow sip of my water, set the glass down, and smiled. It was a cold, practiced smile. "I'm not here for the rehearsal, Frankie," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the massive glass room. "I'm here because this is my building, and you are trespassing." The entire room went dead silent. Bradley frowned, stepping forward. "What the hell are you talking about, Chloe? Have you lost your mind? We have this venue booked." "Actually, Bradley, you don't," I replied, pulling a manila folder from my bag and tossing it onto the table. "You had a tentative hold on the date, a hold that expired when you failed to pay the remaining $45,000, balance 90 days prior to the event, as outlined in Section 4, Paragraph 2 of your contract." "I spoke to Richard Belmont," Bradley sputtered, his face turning an ugly shade of red. "He knows who I am. He said we could settle the balance after the weekend." "Richard Belmont doesn't own this venue anymore," Liam spoke up, his voice dropping to a deadly, authoritative register. "Glass House Holdings LLC acquired the property last month. Chloe is the sole director and legal owner. And as the owner, she decided not to extend credit to a man who can't even afford to pay for his own wedding venue." Victoria Harper pushed her way to the front, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Is this some kind of sick joke? Bradley, tell me you paid the deposit." Bradley shrunk under his mother's glare, suddenly looking like a terrified little boy. "Mother, Belmont said it was fine. I was going to pay it on Monday." "You absolute fool," Victoria hissed, before turning her venomous gaze to me. "Listen to me, you insignificant little girl. I don't care what game you're playing. Name your price. We are having this wedding here on Saturday, or I will tie you up in litigation until you are bankrupt." "I am already bankrupt, Victoria," I said, standing up to face her, "because my sister and my mother stole my $100,000 life savings to buy Frankie's wedding dress." The silence that followed was so absolute, so profound, that you could hear the distant hum of the venue's HVAC system. Victoria slowly turned her head, her gaze locking onto Frankie. Frankie had gone entirely white, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. My mother let out a small, terrified squeak and hid behind my father. "What did she just say?" Victoria demanded, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Victoria, it's a misunderstanding," Frankie stammered, tears instantly welling in her eyes. "My aunt left Chloe some money, but it was family money, and I just borrowed it for the dress because you said my other one was cheap, and—" "You stole money?" Victoria interrupted, stepping toward Frankie as if she were a diseased rat. "You committed grand larceny to buy a dress? You common, pathetic thief." "Mother, please," Bradley pleaded. "Silence, Bradley," Victoria roared. She looked at Frankie with absolute, unadulterated disgust. "The Harpers do not associate with criminals. We certainly do not marry them. The wedding is off. Bradley, get in the car. We are leaving." "Victoria, wait!" my mother cried out, reaching for the older woman's arm, but Victoria swatted her away as if she were an insect. Bradley didn't even look at Frankie. He turned on his heel and followed his mother out the door like a whipped dog. Frankie collapsed onto the marble floor, sobbing hysterically, screaming Bradley's name. Her bridesmaids awkwardly backed away, wanting absolutely no part in the catastrophe. My parents rushed to Frankie, dropping to their knees to console their golden child, who was now clutching her face, her perfect aesthetic completely destroyed. I looked down at them, feeling absolutely nothing. The anger that had burned inside me for months was completely gone, replaced by a profound, peaceful emptiness. They had built their entire lives on entitlement and theft, and the house of cards had finally collapsed. "You have 10 minutes to vacate my property," I said calmly, looking down at my mother. "If you are not gone, I am calling the police and having you escorted out for trespassing. And if you ever try to contact me again, I will press formal wire fraud charges against you for the $75,000 you stole from my account." My father looked up at me, tears in his eyes, finally realizing the magnitude of what they had lost. But I didn't care. I turned my back on them, took Liam's hand, and walked away. 6 months later, Liam and I stood beneath the blooming orchids and crystal chandeliers of the Harrington Conservatory. We were surrounded by Arthur Kensington, our fiercely loyal friends, and a new family we had chosen for ourselves. I wore a simple, elegant $500 dress that I bought off the rack, and I had never felt more beautiful. Frankie was left with a $75,000 dress she could never wear, no fiancé, and a mountain of legal debt as my parents desperately tried to avoid the fraud charges I eventually filed anyway. They learned the hard way that when you force someone to live in the shadows, you shouldn't be surprised when they learn how to operate in the dark. If this story proved anything, it's that karma isn't just real sometimes. It has a master key and a legally binding eviction notice. Never let anyone, especially toxic family members, diminish your worth or steal your future. If you loved this story of ultimate revenge, make sure to hit that like button, share this with someone who loves a good plot twist, and subscribe to the channel for more insane, real-life drama. What would you have done? Let me know in the comments below.